This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What in the hell's going on?
What the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on?
I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
What the hell's the matter with these guys?
We don't know what's going on.
What the hell's going on?
Who in God's name knows what it's all about?
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast, What the Hell is Going On? This is such an apt title for a podcast. Mark, what the hell is going on?
We keep getting validated every single time, I tell you. So we are talking today to Annie Linskey, who's a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, who co-wrote a big piece on June 4th about Biden slipping. And it was a deeply reported story, 45 different interviews that basically went behind the scenes as to what's Joe Biden like. You know, we kept hearing from the White House that, you know, these little clips of him, these moments in the press conferences, that's not what he's really like. I think the White House press secretary Andrew Bates said, not only is the president perform around the clock, he maintains a schedule that tires even younger aides. Mitch Landrieu, the head of the campaign, said, this guy's tough, he's smart, he's on his game. Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, he's sharp, intensely probing, and detail-oriented and focused. There was this effort on the part of the White House to tell the American people, don't believe your lying eyes. The fact is, Joe Biden is completely on top of his game. There's no cognitive decline. He's lapping his young aides and all the rest of it. And it wasn't true, as we all learned in the debate. And the first break in that was with the Her report, where the special counsel spent 5 hours with him and found that the reason why he couldn't bring a case against him for mishandling classified information was because a jury would think that he was an old man with poor memory. And that transcript eventually came out, and it just showed a president that he couldn't remember what year his son died. And he said in a press conference afterwards, when they asked me that question, I said, what damn business is it of yours? And then you got the transcript and they didn't ask him. He brought it up.
The reason that the article that Annie Linskey and Siobhan Hughes wrote in the Wall Street Journal at the beginning of June was so explosive was because they were like the little boy in the fairy tale who stood up and said, why is the emperor wearing no clothes? This is something that everybody in Washington knows, okay? Again, I've written this repeatedly and gotten yelled at repeatedly prior to the debate about the fact that Biden he's not just slipping. That's too genteel. He is, our listeners have heard me use this expression before, but because I'm an old Middle East hand, I remember how we used to refer to Habib Bourguiba, the leader of Tunisia back in the olden days. And people would say, oh no, he has 2 hours of lucidity a day. Well, the Wall Street Journal reported that, in fact, Biden has 6 hours of lucidity a day from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We're talking about the leader of the free world here. This is something everybody in Washington knew, and there was a conspiracy of silence.
Not only conspiracy of silence, they attacked her for writing this piece. Nancy Pelosi called it a hit job, and then the White House attacked them for, it was all dependent on GOP sources. It's like, well, no, they talked to a lot of Democrats, but a lot of Democrats wouldn't say it on the record, but they confirmed it. These accounts of Biden meeting. And, the fact is, this is yet another example of the media establishment writ large. And of course, you can't paint everyone with a broad brush, but not doing their job. And Joe Biden's credibility is in tatters right now, and where everybody's focused on how this debate has affected his presidential prospects. Can he stay on the ballot? Is he going to be replaced? And we had a pot about that the other day. And all that is important and valid. But at some point, there needs to be some media introspection about how this happened, because Jill Abramson.
On, Mark. What fantasy world are you living in?
Well, it's happening to some extent. Jill Abramson, the former executive editor of the New York Times, called this a massive cover-up, and said that the news reporters failed to hold the White House to account, including the New York Times. There was a massive cover-up of this, and it was a cover-up by omission. Right? The White House would say these things and nobody bothered, except for these two intrepid reporters, nobody bothered to go and do what the media used to do, which is to objectively and thoroughly report on a major story that affects, America's credibility in the world. And all these people who were attacking Annie, I hope that they've called to apologize. And I hope that people are saying thank you, because literally you're the only ones who reported on this. And so no one can say that nobody in the media reported on it, and they can all hide behind their skirts, because this was a massive fail on the part of the media, and the media needs to be held accountable for its failure.
First of all, no one is saying thank you or sorry. I want our listeners to hear a couple quotes from this. You mentioned the Andrew Bates quote. He's a spokesman for the White House. Here's what he said about that Journal article. Quote, "It's a little surprising that the Wall Street Journal thought it was breaking news when congressional Republicans told them the same false claims they've spouted on Fox News for years. But it's also telling that the only individuals willing to smear the president in this story are political opponents afraid to use their names, plus one proven liar." Close quote. My personal favorite, though, is Joe Scarborough, Morning Joe. He's talking about former Speaker Kevin McCarthy and the president in this quote. "I've spent time with both of these guys privately, spent time with Biden and Trump privately. I've spent time with every House Speaker over the past 30 years, and Joe Biden, I'm not just not close," he said. If you want to talk about international affairs, if you want to talk about how to get bipartisan legislation, Joe Biden is light years ahead of all of them. I'm sorry, that wasn't even true when Joe Biden was compos mentis. Okay? That wasn't true 20 years ago. Okay? This is the guy who wrote that we should divide Iraq into 3 parts. This is the guy who wrote that we should, because he had a good idea, divide Afghanistan into 3 parts. Joe Biden didn't have all of that 20 years ago, but now he's light years ahead of all of these other people? I mean, give me a break. This is the most naked cover-up by the left-wing media. It is infuriating.
It is infuriating. And let me say at the outset, Annie is not joining in our critique of the media broadly. She's coming on to talk to us about her reporting and why she did it and all the rest of it. But we are free to share, because we're both opinion writers, and we're free to share our opinions. And I will tell you that this is a major crisis of credibility for the media. If you think about the last 3 election cycles, every one of the last 3 election cycles, there's been a big lie to hurt Donald Trump and help the Democratic nominee. In 2016, it was the Russia collusion conspiracy theory, which we spent then 2 years chasing. People got Pulitzer Prizes for it, and the Mueller report came out, and it was a conspiracy theory. It wasn't true. Then in 2020, it was the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop and the 51 intelligence officials who came out and said that it was Russian disinformation. And Joe Biden said that from the debate stage, that it was Russian disinformation, and it wasn't. It was Hunter Biden's laptop. It was another big lie. And now the big lie is that Joe Biden was fine, that he was sharp as a tack, that all this stuff was cheap fakes and political disinformation. It's like, why is it that every one of the last 3 what is the common thread in all of these elections? That Donald Trump was on the ballot for the Republican Party. There was nobody suppressing Watergate. There was nobody suppressing Monica Lewinsky, the story. The media went after all of those stories that hurt a Republican, hurt a Democrat, because the job of the media was to report the news. And the problem with this is that there is now an entire segment of the American public, and not just Republicans, but a lot of independents, a lot of swing voters, a lot of people in the center who just don't trust the media anymore, who don't believe that the information they're getting is accurate. There are polls showing that significant numbers of people think that the media intentionally skews the news to serve their political views. And that is dangerous for our democracy. Everyone's talking about Donald Trump as a threat to our democracy. You know what's a threat to our democracy? Is when the media discredits itself so much that nobody trusts them anymore to tell the truth. And so when they actually do tell the truth, nobody believes them.
All right, look, when we're talking about liars, we have no mean liar in Donald Trump, who told, I don't like the expression big lie because it harks back to Hitler, but who certainly told all of his constituents and the country that he won the 2020 election when he didn't. So basically...
But nobody believed that. But that's the thing.
A lot of people believe that, Mark.
No.
A lot of people believe that. In polls, 50% of...
The Donald Trump told the American people that the election was stolen. It wasn't true. And millions of people believed him because when the media said that it wasn't true, no one believed them because they had lied about Russia collusion. They had lied about the Hunter Biden laptop. Why should we trust them? This is exactly the reason why this is so dangerous. That when they're like since we're bringing up fairy tales, they're the boy who cried wolf. You know, what was the famous Hilaire Belloc story of Matilda whose house burned down and told lies?
Told lies and whose house was burned down, right? Yes.
Yeah, the Matilda, kept calling the fire brigade, and then when finally her house was actually burning down, they said she cried fire, fire, and the people in the street said little liar. That's where people are with the media today. A lot of people just don't trust them, and it's been vindicated again by this debate. And why was the Wall Street Journal the only news organization to do this? Why wasn't this covered by the New York Times and my newspaper, the Washington Post, and everybody else? Why did no one else cover this? Because
there was a
Donald
conspiracy
Trump.
of silence.
Covered it because it would help Donald Trump, and we can't help Donald Trump, even if it's true.
And on that note, why don't we talk to the person who reported the story? And Mark underscored, Annie very nicely agreed to come on this podcast and does not rip the crap out of either the press corps or out of her colleagues, not because she's a lady, but because she's part of a group of people, and there are lots of good reporters out there. The problem is there are an increasing number of bad reporters and bad editors in a consolidating media world that is hard to work in, I think, and in an increasingly partisan political environment that makes it even harder. And she talks a little about that. So Annie Linskey is a White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Before she joined the Journal, she worked for the Washington Post as a White House reporter, and she was the lead reporter on Democrats for the Boston Globe's Washington bureau during the 2016 campaign. She also reported on the Obama White House for Bloomberg News and Business Week.
Here's our interview. Annie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi there. Great to be here.
So glad to have you. So you were on Fox News the other day and you were talking about this story, and you said that this was a really hard story to write and you took no joy in it. Tell us why you felt it was important to report this story, which a lot of people in the media were not covering, and you went in and did the hard, uncomfortable reporting that had to be done. Why was it so hard, and why was it so important to you?
Yeah, I mean, the reporting project that me and my colleague Siobhan launched into, it came up after the Hur report, after Robert Hur released his report in February. The story that we did published in early June. So you can see there that it was just an awful lot of time that was spent on this piece. And the idea was, after the Hur report came out, Robert Hur had spent 5 hours with the president over 2 days. And it kept sort of rattling around in my mind that nobody who doesn't work for Joe Biden had spent that much time with him behind closed doors. He doesn't do media interviews. He doesn't come back on Air Force One to chat with the press. I traveled the world with him, but you just don't see him very much. And so that launched this kind of question of what is he really like behind closed doors? And I also would talk to the White House staff quite frequently, asking this question of, look, voters are saying that he's too old to be president. He says, watch me. And the staff says, if you could only see what we see behind closed doors, you wouldn't feel that way. And voters wouldn't feel that way. And so I had also been really curious about this notion of, like, what is this person that we are missing behind closed doors? How is he behaving differently? And so that was the germ of the idea. And our bureau chief got us together and said, look, we need to really look at exploring this notion of age and how can we get at this for our readers. And so me and my colleague, Siobhan Hughes, ended up getting a few leads pretty early on of moments behind closed doors when the president appeared to be slipping. And we took those moments and we just started reporting them out and reporting them out and reporting them out. And it was a lot. It was a lot of work. And it was so often in journalism, when you're doing a story, there's like excitement that comes along with it, that like, okay, we found somebody and they're going to give us the document, or we found somebody else and they are supporting that. And like, in this case, just Siobhan and I, over and over, when we learned something new and we called each other, there's no joy or gleefulness. It was just, they would say, look, I have seen this and it worries me. And I that created this sort of heaviness about the reporting. It also made us want to make sure that, in so many situations with reporting, you can sort of have one or two, you have two sources and you can feel like, okay, we've got two sources saying this, we can go to the White House. But in this case, we just wanted to be so sure that we were right, that we just kept wanting to have more and more and more sources saying the same thing. And really, that's why it took so long to put the story together.
So after it came out, there was a counterattack against it. You had 45 sources, I believe, 45 interviews that you went into. And the criticism of it was that, well, it was all Republicans. It was Johnson and his people, it was McCarthy and his people, and the Democrats. But you talked to a lot of Democrats, too, and you reported in the piece that as you were interviewing Democrats, all of a sudden Democrats would start calling you back after you interviewed them because the White House had told them to call and say something different or to qualify their comments. To address that criticism and how you talked to Democrats and what was sort of the White House effort to sort of spin the Democratic side of this.
Yeah, when the story came out, there was a lot of criticism that the piece relied mostly on Republican sources. We put that in the piece. We put it in the story. We said most of the sources who are critical of the president are Republicans, most but not all, I might say. And we felt it was important to be as transparent as possible with readers because it is a sensitive topic. But we also felt that, look, we as journalists, we can't live in some kind of world where if there's an R next to your name, you're a liar, and if there's a D next to your name, you're a truth teller. Because as we all know, Republicans do lie, they do, and Democrats do lie, they also do. So, there are not a lot of kind of reliable narrators in this space. And for us, that's why it made it so important that, yes, we were so happy that Speaker McCarthy was willing to speak on the record, but everything he told us was supported by another, if not two, if not three other people who had either witnessed the same thing or had heard about the same thing immediately afterwards. I mean, we thought that helped bolster the sourcing so that if you were going to look at the piece and say, this is a Republican hit job, you would read it and say, actually, look, there are quite a few people that are backing up this reporting. It's not just one person. The other thing that we thought about, particularly for in Washington, this is a sophisticated audience. We were talking to people who were in meetings with the president, Republicans who were in the meetings with the president, or people who had been briefed immediately after from Republicans in the meeting. And who are the Republicans who are going to be granted a sit down with the president of the United States who's a Democrat? Is it going to be Marjorie Taylor Greene? She's not in there. I mean, so we're not, yes, both parties lie and both parties can be bomb throwers and both parties misconstrue what the other party is saying. But in terms of the people who are going to be around the table with the president of the United States, these are among the most serious, sober-minded, leadership-oriented people of either party. And we had thought that would come through a little bit more into the DC audience. I think to the world writ large, our readers, it was a very good reaction to the story. It was one of the best read stories really that I've done in my career. And we got so much response from readers who were saying, thank you for doing this. We are seeing this with our own eyes too. So the sort of reaction in DC was a little different than the reaction writ large.
It's fascinating that you make the difference between the reaction in D.C. to what I would call normal people outside of D.C. I wrote a piece for our Substack a few months ago called Everybody in Washington Knows Everything. And right, we don't all know the same things, but there are very few secrets in Washington. And this was, you wrote about this, you reported it, and you got people on the record, which is a remarkable accomplishment. But this is something that Washington has been talking about for more than 2 years, in everybody's circles. What I want to talk to you about, and I don't want to put you in the position of sitting in judgment on the press corps. You're not on video, but our listeners should know a little eyebrow raise of trepidation. But one of the most interesting reactions to this after the debate, when all of your reporting is confirmed for everybody who sees with their eyes exactly what it is you were talking about, is how come Annie and Siobhan were the only people who wrote about this? And there is a general feeling, Barry Weiss wrote about this in the Free Press and others, and certainly a lot more criticism on the right than on the left, but even on the left there's been some, that there wasn't more of an effort to report on this, despite the fact that a lot of reporters were really critical that the White House has been inaccessible, that he doesn't do press conferences, that he doesn't, as you say, come back in Air Force One to chit-chat, that he doesn't give one-on-ones except heavily scripted and managed. So you've been a journalist forever. Help us understand, without sitting in judgment on people, why do you think you were the first ones to break this story?
I think there are a few different reasons for that. One is structural. A lot of Washington, D.C. news operations have a White House team and a Congress team, and the two are very separate, and there's not a lot of cross-pollination between them. And the Congress team is busy doing their Congress stuff, and the White House team is doing the White House stuff. And, there, honestly, can even, in some newsrooms, clearly not ours, be a little bit of resentment between the two. So I think there's a siloing in DC that was unhelpful for others who are trying to do this story. Siobhan and I very much worked together, and, it is very clear that a number of our sources, not all, but a number of them were from the Hill. So I think that's a part of it. I think a part of it, too, is, look, there's not really a model for this kind of reporting in politics. And I thought about this a lot when I was doing the story of, like, okay, have I done a similar story about someone else? I've been a reporter for a long time. But it's a very big and kind of grave and sobering task to be asking people questions about the president's mental acuity. And it was just the people we talked to, it really took them a minute. We did many of these interviews were done in person just for that reason. You needed to sort of sit down and talk to the person. And it's not like a hallway interview that you could grab somebody as they were going somewhere or call their spokesperson and get on the phone with them. You really had to find people in person and sit down with them. And that's a really heavy lift, especially when so much of the news is kind of daily stuff. It's not something our sources they didn't want to talk about it. They weren't reluctant in that they didn't think it was true. I mean, when they were willing to say something, it's kind of like the guys are opened. But getting them to sort of sit and reckon with what they were saying was something that was a hard barrier to cross, because you just don't, most stories are about policy or, look, the president has this new education policy and I know how to do that story. I'll call my sources in the education world. I will call the people who are on either side of them, figure out who in the White House is in charge of the policy, try to get to that person. Like that's sort of the model. And it's not, look, the president's mental acuity is slipping. It just is a different kind of reporting that we don't typically do.
And also the other thing, the critique of it, that it was GOP named sources. It's really hard to get Democrats to go on the record saying something like that about the president, even if they might say it on background or deep background and confirm what the Republicans in the room were saying. But Jill Abramson had a piece in Semaphore, I think this morning or yesterday, and she said, "It's clear the best news reporters in Washington have failed in the first duty of journalism, to hold power accountable. The White House clearly succeeded in a massive cover-up of the degree of the president's feebleness and his serious physical decline. Shame on the White House press corps for not having pieced the veil of secrecy surrounding the president. Obviously, the president's decline was super hard story to report," and she points out that mostly Republicans spoke to you, "but too many journalists didn't try to get the story because they did not want to be accused of helping elect Donald Trump." And she said that's no excuse for abandoning our first duty. What's just your response to that take on this whole situation?
I mean, some of the pushback we got from this story was exactly that, this is dangerous reporting. You're paving a path for Donald Trump to become president of the United States. I mean, that is just not part of my remit as a White House reporter. We are trying to fearlessly tell the truth. and let the truth fall where it may. I mean, maybe it helps Trump, maybe it hurts Trump. I don't know. There's a lot of different things that could happen between now and November, and it's just the truth. I'm a White House reporter. The biggest story on my beat is the president's acuity. We all know that. And my job, as our editor-in-chief, Emma Tucker, has laid it out to us, is we want you focused your attention on the biggest story on your beat. And she gave me and Siobhan an extraordinary amount of time and leeway and support at all parts of the story to do that.
What's been super interesting to me is that the debate gave everybody else permission to do the reporting that you did first. And all of a sudden, of course, the floodgates have opened. I just tweeted this morning, I've seen every single metaphor out there, right? The floodgates have opened, the dam has broken. And of course, now the New York Times is reporting on this, the Washington Post is reporting on this. But it does help Donald Trump. Okay, let's be perfectly frank. This does help Donald Trump, as did the debate. And we're now seeing the first polls coming out. The debate hurt Biden and helped Donald Trump. But that's not really your job, right? Your job isn't to hurt or help one of the candidates. Your job is to do reporting. There is a perception, and this is a really interesting problem, that and I don't know if you're a J-School person, but that J-Schools now emphasize the idea that you're not supposed to be reporting so much as you're supposed to be guiding people to what a better way is.
Oh, I'm not a J-School person. I was a local reporter at the Baltimore Sun for 10 years before I started becoming a political reporter in Washington for the last 10 years. So I grew up in local reporting, where when I wrote a negative story about the mayor of Baltimore, I'd see her the next day and she'd pick up the Baltimore Sun and she would read it aloud to me in front of the entire city council. So if there's any word, any tone that was off, and then she'd start sort of criticizing the people who were quoted, and many of them were sitting there too. So no, some notion that a reporter is guiding somebody towards something, I think it's not the kind of reporting that I do. My remit is much, much simpler and in many ways harder, and it is just the truth. And that's what we try to do every single day. And do we always get it right? Certainly not. But that's what we're efforting, and that's what we're trying to do. And in terms of Trump, I will just say that, look, the debate, obviously, polling is coming out there, but this is the kind of thing that could push Biden off the ticket. And in that way, that's what I mean, is that you just don't know what's going to happen. The polling right now, certainly, if the election was tomorrow between these two candidates, I think that the odds would certainly be on Trump victory. But I don't know. There's just so much fluidity right now that it's hard to know. But we just had to put that. It's just not what we think about when we're reporting.
That's good to hear.
Journal.
Right. Well, a good caveat, by the way. Look, truth to power is what everybody wants, no matter who the power is. And you know what people think about such things. And there are different thoughts about this on the right and on the left. So you rightly said we have no idea what's going to happen. But we do know, we do understand how time works, and we do understand how biology works, right? Most people who are elderly don't become less elderly with the passage of time. And I think one of the most weak responses of both the vice president and the Democratic sort of apparat has been, don't reflect on one incident, reflect on the last 3.5 years. And the answer is, well, actually, we're reflecting on the next 4 years, because that's what an election is about. And that is an unrebuttable statement. What is interesting to me in terms of what will happen is this 180-degree turn, the floodgates are open, the dam is broken. And now it seems like there is a huge push editorially and reportorially for the president to step aside. That's where it was sort of a sense that outsiders had, that there was an effort to protect the White House and not to report on such things, even though everybody knew this was, rumored. Now the other side is, the sense is that everybody's decided, for the good of the Democratic Party or for the good of the country or for whatever it is, that he has to go. Help people who look at the work that you do, help people understand how to perceive that.
I think, at least in this moment, it would be just such an earthquake to have the presidential nominee replaced. And so that's why there's so much firepower now. I mean, you're just, that's where the story is. That's where the movement is. I mean, I think there are kind of two tracks of reporting right now going on in the world, at least that I'm seeing. One is on this idea of, are Democrats going to rally around Biden, or is the dam going to begin to break? And that falls into like what are donors saying? Could money run out for Biden? As they say, money is the mother's milk of politics. So that's why there's focus on the donors. There's a focus on the polling, not just the national polling, but is the map expanding for Trump? Are there new states coming online that were not swing states before the debate that are now swing states? And then the elected officials, are people going to start calling on Biden to get out? So I think that is just where the kind of news of the day is. Can the president survive this? And then I think the second track that you're seeing, and I think the Times did a version of the story, is are there more moments from the past, particularly the past year, where Biden has slipped behind closed doors? And that, again, comes from that's very good reporting, but the White House is very much opening the door for that when they say, this was one bad night. He's not normally like this. And so that is a sort of an invitation for us to go and really look and say, was that really one bad night? And we also did a story a few days ago talking to European leaders, European diplomats who have seen much of the same thing in
That was a great
meetings.
piece.
Yeah. It's kind of a world of reporting that's expanding on both sides. Kind of one is the day-to-day, what does the horse race look like right now? This is if you're looking at a normal horse race, this is a horse race where like the horses have gone way off the track, and it's become a much more thing than just two horses going in a circle. But it's just become much more interesting and much more, they're just much more fluid than what we were thinking the summer was going to be. So I'm not sure if that answers.
On the European diplomats, just as an aside, last summer I went to Poland and I interviewed President Duda in the presidential palace. And I brought my wife and my kids with me, and his press secretary took them on a tour of the presidential palace. And he showed them the room where foreign heads of state are welcomed and have to sort of receive an honor guard and everything like that. And he showed them the video of all these on his phone of all these different world leaders showing up and walking through and like that. And the only one who had to be guided in every step was Biden. And he showed him the video. It was like noticeably different. There's all these little anecdotes, but so many people just ignored them, shoved them under the rug. We were talking before about, will this hurt Biden or affect Trump? When Woodward and Bernstein broke Watergate, they didn't care that it was going to hurt Nixon. When they broke the Monica Lewinsky story, nobody cared that it was going to hurt Clinton and it might help his opponent.
I think they did care, Mark.
Well, maybe, but everybody reported it. Everyone reported it. Why should, for objective news reporters, is there something about the Trump era that people in the media seem to think that Trump is such an existential threat to democracy that it excuses people from doing their jobs? There's a little bit pointed way of putting it, but is there something that's changed in the Trump era among journalists that somehow considerations that would have never been taken into consideration under any other circumstance are now suddenly, we have to be careful whether we report this because it could help Trump?
I can't speak to other newsrooms, but I mean, that is not the view in the Wall Street Journal. I think we have had incredibly tough coverage of Donald Trump. We were the first outlet to write about Stormy Daniels. Before the 2016 election, we took an incredible amount of grief for that decision, and it had significant consequences even, today. And we were the first to write about this. I mean, we are an old school newspaper in many ways at the Wall Street Journal. Those sort of underlying values have not changed. We are just looking for the truth. And it is just not part of my job or what I think about in terms of how it may or may not affect a presidential campaign.
There was a poll, Pew poll did a poll of journalists and Americans on media credibility in 2022. And they asked the U.S. adults, should journalists always strive to give every angle equal coverage, or does every side not deserve equal coverage? And among regular citizens, it was 76% thought everyone should get equal coverage. Only 22% thought it shouldn't. Among journalists, 55% said every side doesn't deserve equal coverage. And among young journalists, 18 to 29, it was 63%. I mean, what's going on with, is there something going on in the journalistic
What the hell
profession?
is going on
Like
is what you
you
wanna
were
say, Mark.
you were a Baltimore Sun reporter. You came up through doing local news and then rose up to Washington. And is it the collapse of local news that the people aren't getting trained in the local news and how to do basic reporting before they come up? There's something happening among the views of journalists writ large about how to do the job that's affecting this coverage. Do you think, or am I wrong?
It's really, these are all great. I have to say, I don't know. I've always been attracted to and this just comes from my background, I've just always been attracted to the very kind of straight version of news stories where you're not injecting any part of your own view. And that is because, at least in my view, the truth is just so much more interesting. I mean, I'm not, my job isn't to be a partisan on pushing something on one way or the other. I really just want to know what actually happened. And the two of you know that the truth is always more interesting than a talking point on one side or the other, or that's not the land that I play in. When you get to the truth, that is what I find to be satisfying and helpful for readers. I mean, that's what they want, and that's what they're paying me to do. And I have seen some evidence of this sort of different type of journalism that has emerged, but it's not the kind of journalism that I tend to consume. I don't find it useful, and it's hard. The kind of journalism that we do at the Journal is really hard to do, and it's getting harder. It is getting harder. You are finding that more and more people don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear a view I shouldn't say view. They don't want to hear or read a report that is not supporting something that they already believe. And to me, that has been quite frustrating. I've had sort of existential worries about that readers are more interested in just facts or comments or stories that support a narrative they believe, rather than looking to the newspaper to be challenged or to learn something new or to consider that what they believe might be a little bit wrong, or that the facts might not entirely line up and that they might need to shift their beliefs a little bit. But I'm sort of sticking with my kind of old school methods, and hopefully that will serve me well so far.
Good for you. I mean, I used to be a journalist in the olden days when you could call anybody and people would talk to you because they thought they should talk to journalists. This is a long time ago. And now it is absolutely true. And I see that even sort of from a think tank perspective when we want to talk to people, that it is increasingly hard, because why would you talk to Danny and Mark when you could talk to somebody who loves you and thinks you're a hero? And, in some ways it's natural, but it builds this sense of distrust. And you're right, it's much, much harder. And it does raise existential questions. There's no doubt, because people favor sympathetic voices with scoops. People favor sympathetic listeners with inside information. And then all of a sudden, right, and they punish people as well in a much more serious way than they used to in the old days. So anyway, that's my intervention and not my question. I have a question. So I loved your piece, the piece that you did recently that Mark referenced, which is about, and that you referenced, which was about the G7 and what happened. Mark and I are both actually by origin foreign policy people. And it has been really interesting over the last few years to not only watch our foreign embassies, but watch foreign leaders and foreign newspapers have to manage this challenge. Because there's not just a challenge of what the president is doing, there's also an informational challenge, right? These are Obama people who don't actually trust the press and who don't trust wide areas of their own government. So the State Department doesn't know what the White House is doing, and DOD doesn't know what the White House is doing. And there's that siloed effect. But isn't one of the really serious questions that we have to ask, not just, the American people have seen the real Joe Biden. Oh my God, this is really great for Donald Trump. But also, what are our enemies thinking about this? What is Xi Jinping thinking about this? Putin, Ayatollah Khamenei. That seems to me to be a huge story as well.
Yeah, I see and understand why the political sort of fallout of the debate and our story is significant, and it's a legitimate story. But I also think there is a kind of separate piece of like what does this actually mean for the country, and I think that is another avenue that is worth pursuing, and we are continuing to pursue because it is meaningful. Just as a flat out, if this is what things look like today, what is it going to look like a month from now? What's going to look like 6 months from now? What could it look like 2 years from now? And I think that is a very important piece of this story that needs, and I think will be continued to be covered.
Right. I mean, we all unfortunately quote Osama bin Laden, right? When he says, when he said that history favors the strong horse. And sometimes you can be the strong horse. The United States remains economically, militarily, that player on the global stage, but perceptions are hugely important. And that's a big part of what any story would have to be, is what they think they can get away with, even though they may not. So many people could misstep.
One of the interesting, most revealing things that validated your reporting was the photograph that went along with your story. So there's one of the White House, their pushback on you during the reporting was he had spent hours in the Situation Room after Iran's missile attack on Israel and how sharp and engaged he was. And there's a photograph of the president sitting in the Situation Room at the head of the table with his cabinet around him. And I've spent many hours in that room during the Bush administration. And one of the things that struck me watching it is all the name placards are facing the president. And if you look at the same photograph of George W. Bush, they're all facing forward like they do at every conference and everywhere in the world. Why are the placards facing the head of the table?
I saw that you tweeted about that, and there were several others who did as well. This is bad on me. I have not asked about that, and I will. I'll let you know what the NSC says. I mean, it was very striking. It is very striking. I have not spent any time in that room, so I'm not as familiar with it. But you're right. You're right. If there's been a shift there from one administration to the other, you do have to wonder if there's a reason for that. Or if, I don't know, maybe they just had lunch or something. But I think it's definitely worthy of a question into the NSC.
There you go. One of the issues, going back to the question of media credibility, at the end of the 2020 election, Donald Trump told the American people the election was stolen. And large numbers of people, including, I think at the time, something like 80% of Republicans, believed him. And the media reported all the facts, that not a single court had found that he was right, that it was not true. But a lot of people believed him. And I think part of the reason was there's a whole segment of the country that has just decided that the media isn't honest and they don't trust. Media trust is dramatically down. And a lot of Republicans particularly say, look, in 2016, they told us that he had colluded with Russia to steal the election. And that was reported almost as fact. And it turned out when the Mueller report came out, it wasn't true. And then there was the Hunter Biden laptop. It was Russian disinformation. Turned out it wasn't true. Does the media have a credibility crisis that when it was like the boy who cried wolf when Trump finally said the election was stolen and no one believed them anymore? This is a problem for a democracy if significant segment of the country doesn't trust basic reporting anymore, isn't it?
Trust in the media is something that it's one of those things that, keeps me up at night. Me and my husband, we are both reporters, we're both journalists. We both come at this from a very similar approach, a very fact-based approach. Now, I will say my husband is on the opinion side at the Washington Post.
With me.
With you, yes, he's colleagues of yours. So he is, permitted, if not expected, to offer a reported opinion, which is quite different from hackery, which is just repeating White House or Republican talking points. But look, that worries me. I worry about it all the time. My solution here has been to seek out a place to work where the emphasis is on just reporting, and where our editors we're all a pretty humble group of people, and we're all working together and pushing each other. When we did that story, the Biden slipping story, we worked with an editor who's just fabulous, and she's brilliant. And she kept saying, look, you need more. You need more. And we'd say, look, I don't know. Can we get more? This has been hard to get what we have. And she would say, go out and get more. You can do it. I have confidence in you. we're going to give you the time to get more, but you need more. And then we got to a point where she was satisfied. And then we got another layer of editing from New York, and they were saying, you need more. And so it was just, it took months. It took months and months to satisfy the very rigorous standards at the Wall Street Journal. And I don't know, I can't speak for other news organizations, but at our news organization, once you do meet those standards and you've been transparent about them, you have the support and the backing, the full backing of the institution. And that was also very helpful as we went through a sort of difficult aftermath.
Exit question for me, Annie. And you have been extraordinarily generous. These are hard questions, and they're hard questions for anybody who likes to be behind the camera, not in front of it. So it's true. And so we really appreciate your generosity of spirit in thinking about this. I'm going to ask you my hard question, Exit, and you can think about a genteel way to answer it. What was the most surprising blowback that you got to your piece? Because, Pelosi hit you, the White House hit you, your editors wanted more. What really surprised you?
I will say my editors were supportive, entirely supportive. When there was blowback, they were supportive. I think I can share that the editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal called me on my cell phone and said, I see what they're saying about you. I have your back. Don't worry about it for a moment.
That's awesome.
Very
That's
good
amazing.
story.
That's so great.
And I want you to hear it from me. And so I give her enormous credit for doing that. And just for having I don't know her all that well. She's new. I've met her a few times, but just for having kind of the emotional intelligence to reach out and make that call, it meant a lot. I think, there were people sort of in kind of our tribe of reporters who were repeating White House talking points and clearly hadn't read the story. And I'm not saying, look, you can read the story and decide, I don't like it. They didn't convince me. They didn't convince me that they were telling the truth. They didn't meet the bar that I feel as a reader they needed to meet. I think that is all completely fine. And we welcome criticism. We do. That's part of our job, is to welcome criticism. But I think it was sort of some of the knee-jerk sense of people who just clearly just hadn't read the piece. So I would encourage anyone out there who hasn't read it to just read it without the sort of noise from the Twitter sphere about it. We really believe that this reporting was very solid and we got to the truth. And it was hard to do. So if you just read the whole thing, I was on an interview with somebody who said, and you didn't quote a single Democrat in this entire piece. And I was just like, oh my goodness, please just read it. Of course we quoted Democrats. We quoted Democrats supportive of the president. Their view was in the piece. We went to great lengths to make sure their view was very well reflected. So to me, that was a surprising response. We definitely expected there would be criticism, but I had thought the criticism would be, in some cases, a little bit more informed by what was actually in the story, since we were so careful about how we wrote the story.
Yeah, I think some of those Democrats probably wish they weren't quoted because they look like they have egg on their face right now. Exit question for me. So you said that this was sparked in part by the Hur report, where he had access to the president in a way that most Americans didn't. He interviewed him for 5 hours or whatever the amount of time was and saw him in these extended meetings. And then you did this reporting. And then for the first time, the American people in the debate got to see what Joe Biden is in a 90-minute interaction. And I wonder as you watched the debate, what were you thinking?
Oh, yeah. I was in Atlanta and I watched the debate with a colleague of mine. We were both writing on it. I was helping with the front page story for the next day. So, when you're a reporter, you're kind of in reporter mode where you're not sort of watching it and taking it in the same way you do as sort of a normal viewer. Because you're like, oh, I need to get that quote. I need to get that quote. We need to move, you're moving pieces of copy to the desk. So you're kind of working as you're doing it. But I will say that when the president made that response on Medicare, I did look at my colleague next to me and I did sort of stop for a minute and thought, wow, this is what we were being told was happening behind closed doors. This is exactly what people were describing to us. And I did sort of stop for a minute, and which is unusual in a debate sort of moment to just take a moment and think, wow, this is exactly what we had been hearing from our sources.
Well, I'll tell you, Annie, I think that people in the media should be thanking you as an establishment, because no one can go and say that nobody in the media reported this story. before it was obvious to the rest of the world. And you literally, your report is a CYA for the entire media establishment because they didn't report it, you did, and no one can say that it wasn't covered. So as a news consumer and a member of the opinion side of the media, thank you for what you did and for your fair-minded, objective reporting on this story.
Oh, well, I appreciate that.
Thank you. And thanks for talking to us. Thanks for being game.
No problem.
Look forward to seeing all the pieces that are coming down the track.
Well, thank you guys. It was great to be on.
Thank you for doing this.
Terrific.
Danny, what did you think?
So I'm super grateful that there are still journalists out there who I really respect and who I really think highly of. You know, that debate, you were covering it for Fox News. I did a little walk up to the debate on Meet the Press, and we all agreed, all of us, including the Democrats on the panel, including everybody, that this was going to be a debate in which what mattered more than what was said was perceptions of the President of the United States. Could he rebut the Wall Street Journal piece that had suggested that he was not entirely there? And damn, to say he didn't do that is the understatement of the year. I don't know whether everybody has focused on the terrible, terrible mistakes he made. One of them, I didn't catch on at the moment. Here's the deal. There's a lot of young women who are being raped by their in-laws, by their spouses, brothers, sisters, it's just ridiculous. And they can do nothing about it. What the hell was he talking about?
I don't know, Danny. That kept going through my mind on so many different answers and so many different levels. But again, first of all, what's fascinating about this is that the Democrats asked for this debate. They set the ground rules. They set the timing of when it was going to be. They actually wanted to do this early because they thought it would help him and reset the election with Trump. And he spent, he said the other day, and he did. And by the way, he continues to lie about it because he said the other day, well, I just come back from Europe and I was tired and jet lagged and I almost fell asleep on the stage.
11 days before.
And had 9 or 10 days at Camp David or whatever it was, resting, taking naps every day, preparing. They even adjusted his schedule so that he could stay up past the early bird special for the 9 o'clock start time. And now you've got all these CYA stories in the press talking about, the aides said he wasn't like this during the prep. Of course he was. Give me a break. They should have, during this prep, somebody in his family should have pulled aside the chief of staff or something and said, we got to pull the plug on this thing. We can't put him out there. They should have pulled him out of the race. This is elder abuse. To put that man out there, to put him through all that prep, and then put him out there in front of the American people to fail so spectacularly in front of millions of people. If you love Joe Biden, why would you do that to him? Why would you let him go out there and do that?
Because you think Donald Trump is the greatest threat to humanity that's ever existed.
Because it's the grift. Maybe it's because it's the grift, because this family, Dr. and Mrs. Jill Biden likes being the first lady. Hunter Biden still thinks maybe he'll get a pardon. He's been the meal ticket.
He can still get a pardon.
He's the
He
meal
can still
ticket.
get a pardon.
Yeah, he can. But I mean, he's their meal ticket, and they don't want to lose the gravy train. That's how I see it. I'm sorry.
Hey, Mark.
Yep.
I want to close this out with a question.
Sure.
Do you think Joe Biden will be on the ballot November 5th?
I think he will. I think they're stuck. So, number one, they're stuck because they can't skip over Kamala Harris, right? She and the party of identity politics is not going to pass over the first black woman vice president and pick a white male. So that's one. And I don't think she wants him to go off the ticket because if he stays on the ballot and he wins, she's going to be president because he's not going to serve 4 years. He's going to resign at some point during his second term, and she's going to become president. So he's the best path for her to become president of the United States and not have to deal with all these pesky challengers. Second, I think they don't have a clear alternative, even if they could get past the Kamala Harris problem. The reason he's president right now is because they couldn't find anybody else. to defeat. And then also, do you think that Bernie Sanders is going to say, yeah, let's go ahead and nominate another moderate. Let's find Josh Shapiro or somebody who doesn't believe in democratic socialism and have him our standard bearer. We'll just stand aside and not challenge that. The squad and the democratic socialists are going to put forward their own candidate, and there will be a democratic civil war between the left and the far left. Of the Democratic Party, and his family doesn't want him off, as you pointed out in your Substack. He doesn't want to leave, and his family doesn't want to. I just don't see. There's putting aside all the technical reasons, the politics just don't play for it unless it just becomes so clear. Unless his polls collapse significantly, like he drops 10 points, he's dropping a few points here and there. He's like, I think the swing state polls are down 3 or something like that.
They're showing Trump ahead in New Hampshire now and in Virginia.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I guess the answer comes in the polls. If the floor falls out from him, then they're going to have to do something. But if he stays sort of modestly competitive despite all this, then no, he'll be the nominee.
Okay.
What do you think?
Everybody, write it down.
What's your prediction?
So I still believe that he'll be the nominee, but I think he's got to make it through the next couple weeks.
And he's got a debate again in September. They've scheduled it. This is not something that's optional. It's ABC News. He's agreed to do it. Donald Trump has agreed to do it. All the ground rules are agreed to. The time is agreed to. The place is agreed to. He'd have to pull out of the debate in September right before the election, and that would be as damaging to him as his debate performance was.
The only question is, could he actually do worse than he did last week? I don't know. It's possible. We'll see. Interesting conversation today. Thanks, folks, for being with us. Take care.
See you next week. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.